think concretely with you about how we can practice hospitality with different types of people. So we'll spend 2 lessons thinking about how you and I can practice hospitality and friendship with people that consider themselves Christians, that are in the fold. And then we'll spend 2 lessons thinking about different types of people that are completely unfamiliar with the church and unfamiliar with God and have no experience hearing or experiencing the gospel through a relationship with a disciple. So that's the general flow of things. This morning as we start, I want to throw out a question for you guys. And it's okay if you take a minute to answer too, because this may take a minute for somebody to come up with an example. But I want to talk for a minute out the gate here about how we have experienced hospitality in our own lives. So maybe there's an example that comes right to mind for you guys. But think with me, and somebody, if you're willing to raise your hand and share, of a time in your life when you experienced hospitality from a Christian that had a major effect on you, whether it's your faith, your relationships with the church or individuals. Roberto?
Well, one of my first memories is maybe before 2 years old. My mother separated my father, and she had to move back to my grandma's house. And she basically took me in like her own son. My mother had to work, and because of that relationship, and she was like one of the few Christians in Colombia, I became a Christian.
From your grandma?
But she was, talking about hospitality, that's the best example.
Yeah. The church, one of the church's major pillars is a praying and faithful grandmother. I'm absolutely convinced of that. My first experience was my dad's father, faithful Catholic, devoted woman, loved the Lord. That's the first example I had, just by seeing what a life of faith looked like. Any others?
I found Res Pres through hospitality. I had visited New Life a couple times up in Escondido, but it's far away from where I live, so I wasn't going to go there. But there's one family there, the Drummonds, they invited me for Thanksgiving. It was really sweet, just treated me like family. And then I went back just one Sunday to visit them at New Life, and they were pitching Res Pres at the time. So I found it, and here I am.
That's sweet. When I was in treatment, I was in jail when I got sober. I had heard the gospel. I think I've shared that with some of you guys. And then I read scripture. And then I went to a residential treatment program called the Freedom Ranch. They would take us to a church every week. And like virtually every person that's new in recovery, you're sorting out a lot of issues around shame and self-condemnation and guilt. But we'd go to a non-denominational church in Campo, which is a very small town out in the desert, every Sunday. And I was thinking of this, that the pastor would always make a point to come and talk to me and a few of the other guys that would go to service every Sunday. And he would literally have to leap out of the pulpit, run outside the building and catch us, because we were all in a big hurry to get in the van and go back to the treatment center and not have to talk to a pastor. But he would do that every single week. And super personable, inviting. Turns out he was a former addict himself. And so he always made it a point to build that relationship with us and make us feel welcome. So there's a group of guys that would go back every week. And every week we try and get away from that awful conversation, but he just intervened, talk to us, make us feel more and more welcome, just by these small exchanges. Just simple conversation. Any other examples come to mind for you guys?
When we were new in the ministry, and people would from our old church, where we had gone to church when her was in seminary, would invite us over. But then once we started having kids, I thought, well, surely no one's going to want to have us over and our kids, And there were these 2 couples who they were just genuine in their welcome, and they had toys for the kids to play with, and the kids would call them aunt and uncle. And I just remember being amazed that they would open their home to us and our children.
Yeah. Genuinely,
Yes.
not as a matter of obligation, yeah.
No, that really impressed me.
Yeah, and you just in sharing that story, you make a great point. There's a thoughtfulness in it that communicated. It's genuineness for you guys. Having space for the kids, toys for the children. They really were thinking of making space for you guys in their lives.
Yeah, and wanting to get to know them and interact with them, spend
Yeah.
time with them, it was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another good point. You can see hospitality in how you treat people's children. Great examples. Thank you very much for sharing them. So my main ideal for this lesson is just this, that through hospitality, we genuinely have the opportunity to bring the love and light of God to others. Rob and I were talking about this series in, lucky last one. We're talking about the series, and he made the comment that really has stuck with me in thinking about the significance of hospitality and saying that as Christians, we really bring the light of God into the world. Hospitality is a wonderful everyday way that we get to do that. That it can be very genuine. It doesn't have to be forced. It doesn't have to be overly spiritualized. It doesn't have. It's just a genuine, organic thing that God calls us to do with one another. So I've broken this up kind of from two avenues, and I'm thinking about these things through the lens of hospitality. I want to move through these with enough time to have John's here. We had another volunteer who was brave enough to reach out to somebody they don't know. So John was able to make it. I want to leave time for you to share your interaction with somebody that you don't know before the end of the lesson. First, let's think about Jesus. I made the mistake of studying the Gospel of Luke and Acts for examples, and suddenly found myself drowning in examples of how Jesus embodies the hospitality of God. So that's my way of saying this was painful to whittle it down to a couple of examples. One of my favorites. First, if you look at point one, Jesus embodies the divine hospitality of God to sinners. We know that's kind of a hallmark of him entering into the world. And he does that in very personal ways as well as cosmic ways in the act of redemption, but also in his life and the relationships that he engaged in and built with people who did not know the mercy of the Lord. I chose one of my favorite ones from Luke 19, 1 through 10. Some of you may remember I actually preached a sermon on this in the summer. The reason why I like this, if you're unfamiliar with the story, is Zacchaeus was a tax collector who was considered heathen in his own society, in his own culture. And Zacchaeus in particular was a chief of tax collectors. So he'd kind of be the guy who not only monopolized on Roman taxes, but he would monopolize on people being oppressed by the Roman Empire. And he became wealthy by it. If you know this story, it's interesting in that Jesus invites himself to Zacchaeus' house. A lot of the times we think about hospitality, and this is not wrong, we think about hospitality as you and I making the move to invite somebody else into a space that we're creating for them. I love this example because it throws it on its head in a way in that Jesus displays the hospitality of God to this sinner, the chief tax collector that he sees sitting in a tree, by inviting himself into that space, into his home space. If you look in the notes there, a couple of things that the story communicates indirectly. First, God is always the one that welcomes sinners into his presence, right? You and I do that by way of being people who embody the life of Jesus in the kingdom of God, and also the nature of God and how we live as Christians. If you think about evangelism, this is essentially what we're doing. We are giving people a point of contact with the God who has saved us. Hospitality is one of the most disarming ways that we can do that, and one of the most inviting ways that we can create an opportunity for people to experience God through us. That may be intimidating if you think about yourself on any given week and how you're practicing your faith, how you're living, if you're going by your own track record. But hospitality has a wonderful way of throwing that all out the window, because what we're doing is just inviting people into our life to see what the life of a real and perfect Christian really looks like. And that helps them experience God as he is. And it helps them experience the grace of God as it truly plays out in the life of one of his disciples. Zacchaeus is a great example in another way, in that if you're familiar with the story, when he has this experience with Jesus, what's his response for anybody that knows the story? How does he respond?
Well, he immediately scurries down the tree. He can't believe his good fortune. You know, this man who is sought after by thousands,
Yeah.
couldn't believe that he was called out in front of everybody. That's in itself, you know, you'd think Jesus would say, now, somebody throw up a rope and throw him off, you know, hang him from that tree. But no, instead, he goes, Zacchaeus, come down.
They may have, yeah, you're right.
I'm going to your house for lunch, you know, and he goes, what? Is he talking to me?
Yeah.
So, you know, Jesus used that opportunity to demonstrate, you know, his reaching out to him. You know, more of the last shall be first and the first shall be last.
Yeah.
And none of that was lost on Zacchaeus.
Yeah, what's his response to Jesus? Keep going from here.
Well, it's not lost on Zacchaeus that, you know, he was as the Sunday school song goes, a wee little man. But I think he was in the tree not because he was so little, but because he was afraid of being in a crowd. That was dangerous for someone who is as hated as much as he was. And so it wasn't that he was small, it was that he would have had to have been at a great distance to see Jesus.
Sure.
But he scurried down and then went to his house, but his brain's working on this the whole time. Why me? Why me? Why me?
Yeah.
And throughout that process, Jesus never once confronted him and said, you are oppressing my people. You are stealing from you. No, Jesus just loved him. He just cared about him.
Yeah.
And so the final result, which is what you're getting at, is that this brought deep sense of conviction and calling from Zacchaeus,
Yeah.
who decided that not only was he going to turn over a new leaf, but do what he could humanly possibly do to correct the wrongs of the past
Yeah.
and restored fourfold what.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites because he makes restitution. He sees his wrong through just experiencing the love of Jesus and the welcome of Jesus, right? And then he also says, I'll give to the poor. He instantly has this response of generosity towards others so they can experience what he experienced through the Lord.
Jesus, he flipped a switch there, which is what we can do
Yeah.
too. We're not Jesus, but I think we can flip a switch, open up a channel of
Yeah.
communication and relationship with people by just using that vector of vulnerability and transparency,
Yeah.
bringing them in, as you were saying, to our lives, and suddenly they don't feel afraid. They, you know, you take away that specter of condemnation or shame, but suddenly they're relating to you as, you know, someone that they can be secure with.
Yeah.
That opens a lot of channels.
Yeah, the love of God is liberating, and Christian hospitality, as it communicates that love, is inviting. It's a great way to think about hospitality.
I'll know I've stepped to that next level of spiritual maturity when I start to love tax collectors.
Lord help us! Hospitality flattens like February to May. Oh my gosh, that's too real. Why did I do that? No. Point B there, just building on that. God uses fellowship and friendship to bring people into his kingdom and then set them free to offer others the same invitation. We're kind of building on the example of Zacchaeus there. This is a constant theme. Jesus having meals with people as a way of engaging them with God's kingdom and God's love and mercy constantly all throughout the Gospel of Acts and then, or the Gospel of Luke and then Acts as well. So I put a couple of examples up there from the Gospel of Luke, but two things that I'm pointing out in particular. The Passover meal with his disciples. It offers his disciples a way to reflect on what he's done and what he's going to do to make relationship with God possible and permanent for them. I think we touched on this last week. I think John and I may have commented on this. We are experiencing this every week when we gather and we take the Lord's Supper. The Lord's Supper is an invitation to fellowship with God, renewed and refreshed as a reminder. It's also this divine, kingly invitation for us to remember that we belong to a different kingdom. Therefore, we're called to live in a different way. And nothing can change that. You know, anytime you hear me talk about the Lord's Supper, you'll hear me mention that, and Rob as well. When we fall short, as I call as Christians, on any given day of the week, we are called to that table in the fellowship of God to be reminded that nothing has changed. His generosity and relationship with us is as perfect as it ever was because of the sacrifice of Christ. And then secondly, you'll notice I noted one of the resurrection meals. This one's from Luke 24, 36 through 53, and that offers a call to respond to God's generosity to us. You know, if you're not familiar with the story, Jesus is making a resurrection appearance to his disciples after he has this exchange with two of the disciples on the road to Emmaus. It's a pretty amazing interaction, and they're all freaked out. They're all super scared because he's actually appearing to them in his resurrection form. And one of the things that he charges them with is to be what? To be witnesses. Not to be perfect, you know, not to be perfect as he was, not to do the exact same things that he is, but to be witnesses to his mercy in the world. First and foremost, that he's resurrected, that Jesus is the risen God. So everything that he said about himself and what he was going to do actually took place. And then be witnesses to what that meant for people who didn't know him. A lot of the times we read these accounts, and I think especially in evangelical communities, again, we tend to have a very narrow view of what that means in our lives. We need to be missionaries, share the gospel. All those things are 100% true. I'm thinking more, as I mentioned, through the lens of hospitality here, and that a wonderful way that we get to practice witnessing to the resurrection life of Jesus is through how it plays out in our lives as imperfect people. What are a couple of things that come to mind when you think practicing hospitality as an imperfect person?
As an imperfect, what?
Yeah, as imperfect disciples. I'll share one from our life first. So Janie is very civilized. She's a far superior human being on every level than I am. And so when we think of hospitality, Debbie may have commented on this already, she's very much of the mind that we should create a hospitable, inviting space for people, which is true. I'm more like a barbarian, so I like people just welcome into a tornado if they came over to my house on my own. And so for us, it's learning the balance. If people come over, we're in a rush, it's after a long work day, the house is kind of messy, but we're making them a meal and inviting them into our space, what are they experiencing? Real people, that Christians are real people with the real pressures of a real life and kids and all the stuff that comes along with that, right? It dispels a lot of the misunderstandings that people have about what a Christian life may look like. What are some other examples that you could think of?
One thing I think about is like, I feel like whenever I go to somebody else's house, I sometimes feel like this imposter syndrome, like I don't feel like I belong there.
Imposter syndrome.
It's not exactly right. And there's some dynamic like that where you don't exactly feel like, and so if I have somebody over or I'm meeting someone new, there's like this dynamic where I want to make sure they know that like we're actually, it's not that you don't belong here, so we're actually like equal in some way here.
Yeah.
Like, and they can be like little self-deprecating jokes that aren't, you know, don't go too far or something, but just like maybe it brings a little bit of peace and I don't know, common ground in some way that they feel comfortable being in this space or something.
Yeah, it's relatable.
Sometimes when people come over, that may be sensing that, one good way, and sometimes what I do is I put them to work. There's always more to do, but, you know, can you help me do this, or
Yeah.
get that finished, or, you know, put that away. And that sort of engages them as part of the process of hosting.
Yeah, it invites them to participate.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like that.
and especially if other people are coming too, and they're, you know, very much a part of what's happening there.
Hmm. Any other thoughts?
I think too, being in your own home really does invite them into a place of something that you have created to be secure.
Yeah.
So you can, to try and express or to convey that, or to translate that into, you come into this house, it's a place of security, openness, transparency. We are who we are, like you were saying, and we want you to be too.
Yeah. You're welcome to be who you are here.
Yeah.
That's the way Jesus wants to be here.
The question had something to do with us as broken people, inviting people in? How do you
Yeah.
put it?
What, I guess I'm wanting us to consider how that could be actually disarming and welcoming for people.
Yeah, I think I used to feel like I had to have the perfect menu.
Yeah.
And a
No
lot of
pressure.
times, I mean, even if they just come in for hot dogs or something, or
Yeah.
peanut butter and jelly, just,
Yeah.
that can be, I've had to learn not to get too uptight about having everything, the menu. Because so many people are into, presentation and all this, and I'm just not good at that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're kind of speaking to the difference between entertainment and hospitality, like you mentioned before. How entertainment really lays the trap for us to focus more on us and what we experience from it, as opposed to hospitality is focused on others. And when people genuinely experience that, like you said, it doesn't really matter as much what you're serving or how it looks. It matters what they're experiencing, particularly of God through you. And that's the point of biblical hospitality right now, helping people experience God through us. What does that mean for the church? Point 2 there. The church is called to embody Jesus. Jesus' love to each other and to outsiders. So one example of each of those, the first one I'm noting, Matthew 25, 35 through 30. And this is an interesting passage because the larger context is Jesus is talking about final judgment. And but he makes the comment, 35 through 40 here. Let me read it for us real quick. He's speaking to his disciples, and he says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me food." Or of his disciples, excuse me. He says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me also." So just an important reminder, you guys, Jesus isn't giving a teaching to say, like, how you practice your own righteousness, and that's what vindicates you in final judgment at all. The point he's making here is that the way that we live life and the hospitality and service that we practice to one another is a fruit of the mercy and the love of God that we've experienced in our own life. So it's a necessary byproduct, and that puts hospitality in its right location when we think about what we're called to practice. It's not something that we strive for to earn anything, but it's in the larger context of a call to live, thinking of Ephesians that we're going through right now. It's located in a larger identity that you and I have because we've experienced God's mercy and His love for us. So that, it reframes it. It gives us a wonderful opportunity to help other people experience the same thing through us. Was there a hand over here? No. Okay. The second example, real quickly, so I can leave some time for John here, is from Luke 14, 12 through 24. And in this, it's commonly referred to as the parable of the great banquet. And here Jesus is thinking of people who are outsiders to the kingdom of God and strangers to the family of God. If you're familiar with that story, in this parable, God is inviting people who really have no right to attend a royal banquet. And that's a great picture for all of us. None of us have the right to be invited into God's family, right? This is gospel basics that we're talking about. But in this parable, he highlights something that should influence and really inspire us to welcome other people into our lives as well. Because in that parable, what God is communicating is that people who have no place at his table now have a place at his table. And when you and I engage in simple acts of hospitality, we are communicating something about that reality for people that don't know him, or people that may have heard about him but don't believe that they could be invited as well, right? That's one of the beautiful aspects of this whole story. So if you look at C, I have written there that hospitality is our way. It's a way that you and I get to practice sharing grace that we don't deserve. I love that. You know, on the days when I remember that that's really the call of my whole life, it's amazing. When I have those days when I feel overly responsible for how people experience Jesus or what I communicate and how I live, that statement is like this crushing burden that stresses me out, makes me feel convinced that I can't do it correctly, and makes me shy away from creating a life where I'm giving open invitations to people to experience the love of God through me, through my family, and in my home. Let me ask this. For those of you that have tried to practice hospitality or welcome people that don't know the Lord into your lives, how have you experienced that frustration?
You can tell about me, Janice, if you want. I know that's what she was thinking.
Linda, go ahead, start it off.
Well, first of all, I love that Jesus was Middle Eastern because
Boom, little shout out.
I just love that he's Middle Eastern. Middle Easterns are some of the most hospitable people that I know.
Yeah.
And I just think of like my wedding day, for example, with the dancing and the drums. You know,
Yeah.
Lebanese culture is like my culture. It was our culture. But like the Lebanese people were so willing to share that with people that weren't Lebanese, and they like invited them in, and like it was just a really cool experience to see like hospitality in that way. Like,
Yeah.
and I think like as Christians, we like there was a moment where I was sitting there and I was like, I wonder how the white people are going to respond to this. Like,
Yeah.
and so, but then I don't know. I feel like we don't need to worry about that. We're sharing something that's beautiful, and if they accept it, great. If not, they can sit down and wait 15 minutes for it to be over.
It's more like 25. We just
Yeah.
get that.
But yeah, so that's I think about that all the time. Like whenever there's someone I invite to like a sermon, I'm like, gosh, we're talking about sexual immorality. This is great.
Yeah.
Like first time they're hearing about
Yeah.
this, but then like it will be like that sermon where God like really moves in them, and I'm just like, the Holy Spirit's just so cool in the way He works.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Great example from the wedding too.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Was there a hand over here? Janice, were you gonna tell us how hard that was to deal with?
No, I won't say that.
She knows it.
No, I'm just thinking, it's been so long since we've practiced hospitality, or I have, that I really have to think, this is good for her, because some changes going forward. It's been so long.
I appreciate your honesty. Yeah, that's. And it's we're going to talk about this more. You highlight something. Practicing hospitality, making space to invite people that don't know Jesus into your life is sacrificial. It's hard. Legitimately, it can be a hard thing to do. If you're married, you work, you have a family. There's all these factors that make it a challenge, and that's totally okay. God knows that. The call to discipleship is sacrificial in nature, and He doesn't hold that against us. He doesn't judge us for that, but He calls us to reflect on what He's done for us so we can reframe it in our minds and think, it is worthy. It is worth sacrificing for, and it's not impossible. And in the end, as imperfect as it is, we're creating a beautiful way for people to get closer to Him through us.
There's an interesting dynamic if you're doing that, inviting unbelievers, first, you don't want to make them feel like a project.
Yes.
And secondly, you don't want to corner them into a conversation where you're trying to, tell them the truth, the gospel, this is
Close
what they
the
need to
deal,
believe.
yeah.
It has to be naturally
Yeah.
open.
Yeah.
And thirdly, the struggle in doing that is that when people come over, you want to relate to them at a deep level. The deepest level that you have is spiritual. They don't have that.
Yeah.
And so you're having to sort of walk that back a little bit and relate to them on a more surface level, which is always frustrating to me. We can get deep, but when they start going deeper, that's where the challenge comes, because they're going deeper on a secular and pagan or unbelieving level. And the one way you engage people is by relating to them or
Yeah.
getting on the same plane with them. And you're not on the same plane, so how can I affirm them when I can't affirm them? I mean, I can't affirm this way. So it goes back to, well, this is what and so there's always that fine line.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be stones left unturned.
Mm.
And that's what I have to assume is that, look, you're not going don't try to convert them tonight.
Yeah.
Just ask the Lord for direction, open doors, and planting little seeds here and there.
Yeah.
And not feeling guilty about, because they'll go off on well, this is my philosophy of life.
Right.
And your response is not to come back, well, here's what's wrong with that.
Yeah.
Point one, point two.
Yeah.
You can't go there,
Yeah.
but you just listen to them and then maybe relate a couple ideas. So that's the dynamics in inviting believers. A lot of times you can't really connect with them on a level I can't, that I want to, but just be satisfied with little baby steps.
Yeah, well, you're highlighting a couple important points. One, when we give people space to be who they are, we're affirming them as individuals and image bearers, even if they have flawed or incorrect views, right? As we all do, side note. So we're affirming that, and we're creating a space where they can truly be who they are. And second, I really like the way you're just thinking about it out loud with us, Herb, because you're highlighting the fact that the art of sharing the love of Jesus with people can only happen through the context of relationship. That complexity that you're speaking so well to can only happen in the confines of a growing friendship with someone.
Yeah.
That's why you always hear me make that kind of somewhat cynical comment, like closing the deal with the gospel. It's really not how it happens.
It doesn't.
Typically, occasionally it does, but hospitality really is the art of building space and relationships where people can experience that
Yeah.
from God through us. And that takes time and sacrifice. Dan?
I think this is kind of indirect to hospitality, but I think your job, our job, I'm not quite ready for it yet, but in terms of talking to people about it, I think is that we're in a world now that's so much more distracted than I think it used to be in a lot of cases. I think it's so hard to penetrate some of that because with socialist media and social media and all the other stuff going on. Everybody's head is somewhere else, right? And I read something like in the last year and a half or 2 years where it was talking about the information that we process now on a daily basis is more information than our grandparents processed in their entire life.
That would surprise me,
It's insane how much that's more. So I think there's just a lot of noise to get through.
Linda?
Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
I just feel like hospitality too, especially with Jesus, he entered, it's not just about inviting people into our space and welcoming them, it could be entering into their space,
Yes.
entering into say
Yes.
having a genuine interest in
Yeah.
them and their life
Yeah.
and why they believe what they believe, and I think that's super important as well, and I feel
Yes.
like those have been the most impactful relationships for me.
Amen. Yeah, that's going to be a theme that we're going to talk about in all the remaining lessons, how hospitality isn't just, trajectory isn't the main thing to think about with hospitality. It's just as much about entering into their space
Yeah.
and kind of, in a way, drawing people out towards Jesus.
Yeah.
Want to talk about frustration? I used to work at a Christian school, so I used to teach at a Christian school that was very, like, we prayed every morning. It was beautiful. And now I'm working in a public middle school where I literally, legally cannot share my faith with the kids. And so, like, trying to dance around that and be like, well, what, you know, like, what can I say? Like, what, you know, how do I make connections, or how do I genuinely connect with kids when I legally can't be 99.9% of who I'm supposed to be?
Yeah.
You know, it's been so frustrating.
Yeah.
But like, I'm wearing my cross necklace now, but I wasn't wearing it at work for a while because I was like, I don't even know how I
Concerned,
can
yeah.
do that,
Yeah.
you know, and then I
Yeah.
just started wearing it because I was like, whatever. But
Yeah,
the,
that's,
like, being in a vocation that legally I'm not allowed to do that
yeah.
is so frustrating.
Yeah, and you know, that highlights the, even when we feel restricted explicitly, we have the opportunity to display the power of God implicitly by who we are and how people experience us. You know, and like some of the other comments here, there's times when that's actually the most powerful witness we can give, is to make people wonder, what's different about that person? As opposed to the guy who's on the corner with a bullhorn, so to speak. Extreme example, but nonetheless, please.
Just to be able to speak to what's different about this awesome person. I've known Rowan my whole life, and I moved away for school and such to Canada, and I actually just moved back, and in moving back I escaped a pretty bad part of my life, and Rowan and her family have always shown me great hospitality and friendship and just an open space and just always a place to go that was safe and kind.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a Christian household, so this is a comfortable and familiar place for me and a happy place, but it's not many times in my life that I've gone and attended a service enthusiastically. That wasn't a sense of like an obligation or like a selfish reason, like cookies or something.
Yeah. Donuts and coffee.
Don't ask. Well, there are
We're not
some-
above it here.
Exactly. Well, there's some selfish reasons that I want to go. It's there are a lot of first like kind of enthusiastic way that or enthusiastic feelings that I've had to come to service, both for the connection and just the happy space and my friends. So
That's a
this is-
great example.
this
Thank
is
you for
great.
being willing to share that. Yeah, it's kind of a perfect example. Yeah, and you highlight a powerful point. It's just as true and important for those of us who know the Lord, been around the Lord maybe our whole lives, as opposed to people who have never heard the word Jesus, right? It's just as valuable and powerful in God's economy. Let me ask John to share with us a little bit, because we're running over
Well,
time.
that's comment. I would
Closing
say
comment.
that is definitely ready for the next step in hospitality. I mean, anyone who would order ahead Mary's Donuts, get up early enough to make a trip down there,
This man is
pick it up
ready.
and bring it in and give us brain food
Yes.
for being able to comprehend Sunday school. Thank you.
Yes.
That's
So,
hospitality for all.
yes, it is. Thank you very much. So, wow, pastor's even clapping for you. So we asked, very simple exercise, 2 volunteers to go to somebody that they see in their life and to engage in simple conversation. Ask them what their name is, find out about them a little bit, and start a relationship with them, even if it's just a neighborly one. John and Becker and Jordan volunteered. So John, you were here. Share with us what you did, how it went, what went well, what you hated, what you loved. Any initial thoughts?
Yeah, it went pretty well. So I was gonna meet the next door neighbors we just moved into a new townhome. And so I made cookies on Tuesday when it was rainy all day, and just delivered a bunch of maybe 15 cookies with like a little card. Hopefully they were gonna open their door, but they didn't open their door, so we just left it in a Ziploc bag outside the door. They eventually picked it up the next day and then wrote us a note back, which was really sweet, with their numbers and names and everything. And so then we created a group text now with them.
Oh.
And they've been joking back and forth. They made fun of me for leaving the garage door open, all that kind of stuff. And then the plan is hopefully this week we'd all get together and hang out. There's like 3 of them next door and then 3 of us, and hopefully hang out and hopefully start a friendship of some sort.
Nice.
So we haven't actually like met them face to face in person or anything, but.
Very 21st century, you already texted.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
Just
just
a very,
impressed.
much more comfortable way.
I'm just impressed you bake cookies, man.
Yeah, it was that was the first thing they're like, these are amazing. It's a cookie recipe I had from college that has won me many friends in my life.
That's the secret weapon.
Exactly.
Yeah, Ellery, my daughter, she's the master of that. She always bakes cookies and pastries and gives them to people. I'm like, girl, you know the art of
Yeah, it went well.
That's great, and it sounds like you engaged your 2 roommates.
Yeah, they're
So Josiah,
Josiah and Thomas. Scalata.
Josiah and Thomas Colada, yeah, let many of us know, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So the 3 of you inviting them.
Josiah Timothy?
Yeah,
Yes,
our Timothy.
Josiah
yeah.
Timothy,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Formerly known as Timothy, now it's just.
Yeah,
It is Josiah, that's what he's going
He
by?
goes by
Okay,
Josiah.
I'm not up with it, okay.
Thank you for being willing to do that. Intimidating at all? Was it stressful?
I think, I mean, it was gonna be like, the worst case was like, they took the cookies and didn't want anything to
Yeah.
do with us. I think there was a fear when I dropped the cookies off, and it's like, are they ever gonna respond? Or,
Right.
like, maybe they never get back, but then, when they left us a note back, it was like, oh my gosh, it worked. Like, we might have friends, like we friends, it was sweet, so, yeah, I think that's,
To be continued.
to be continued.
Can I ask you if you guys end up having dinner with them or hanging out, that you would share with us? Okay. And we can continue to pray for you. And what's their names?
Alyssa, and Amber.
Alyssa times 2.
Alyssa times 2. One of them has 2 S's, one of them's 1 S.
So it's a list,
Yeah.
And then what's the third
like
one?
wherever rock I am.
I'm sorry, Amber? Amber. Okay, awesome, thank you so much.
So are Jordan and Beck are sick? Because they never miss.
I'm wondering,
They
yeah.
must be sick.
Yeah, I'm wondering. Okay, so week 2, guys, I want to throw out the same, I got another softball. If you're afraid of taking the leap of faith exercise, first 2 weeks, easiest one to do. I want to ask for 2 more volunteers to do the same thing. Engage with somebody that you see in your life, in your work life, your neighbors, somebody you see on a walk every morning, any area of your life, and just engage in simple conversation with them. Hi, how are you? What's your name? Where do you live? Et cetera, et cetera. Just simple relationship builder. 2 volunteers. Crystal.
I'm not even here, sorry. I'm gonna go to nursery, but yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You have to
Everything
come
collapsed.
next week and tell us how it went.
You will have to
Yes.
attend next week.
Okay, Sunday school.
She's like, actually,
She's like, no, I will be here. I'll have, yes, I will be
Good
here.
for you. I will pray for you.
Thank you, please, always.
Linda, thank you very much. Dad, 3 volunteers. Ah, I saw their hand, it's up.
Yeah, so, yeah, I'll probably lean on Denise with this, but, yeah, we'll take that.
Okay, awesome. So Dad.
Whoa, the dad is here.
Hey. And Linda. And I want to ask for a team of 3 dedicated volunteers. We're going to pray every day. We're going to pray for them. Debbie, thank you so much. John, thank you. Matt, thank you very much. Okay, awesome.
Oh, that's right.
You guys-
I won't be here next
She
week.
won't be here
I'm
next
out,
week.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, she will.
Okay.
Deputy 2 weeks.
That's okay, we have to, yeah, thank you though. We'll circle back with you. Thank you for being willing. Okay, and just as a reminder for anybody that's here, if you're not getting emails for Sunday school, I send an email midweek. If you're not getting them, you'd like to be on the email list, just give me your email address after we close this prayer here. And I'm gonna be sending out resources, reminders, and prayer requests, particularly about the things we just talked about. Okay, let me, Debbie, please.
Yeah, I want to be on that list. I'm not getting him.
You're not getting the emails? I'm not getting them
I
either.
don't think I'm getting it.
I'm gonna-
Wow! God. Okay.
Maybe my email address is wrong. Maybe I should, I'll send it.
Okay. Get with me right after I pray here, guys. Don't I have like an admin expert to help me with this stuff? I think I need to start taking it. Let me pray. Lord, thank you for being such a wonderful God that you give us these calls. You give us your Spirit and the power to carry out these calls. You give us your word to help us understand what it means, and more importantly, what it doesn't. That it's really about you and the expansion of your kingdom and the sharing of your love and mercy through us in imperfect and even messy ways, and how you not only choose to use those vehicles, but you delight in using us. We thank you for the reminder of that. We thank you for service and the reminder that the work that you started in us is sure to be completed, and that it culminates in eternity with you in heaven. We pray that you would bless our service, bless Rob as he preaches the word to us, and bless our hearts and strengthen them as we hear the gospel this morning. Amen.